Story 1. Saturdays were routine. Familiar. Safe. Every weekend, without fail, I'd head to the small grocery store down the street. It was nothing special, just a quiet little place where the shelves never moved and the same flickering light near the dairy section buzzed like a trapped insect. I liked the predictability. I liked knowing exactly where everything was, which checkout line moved fastest, and that, without fail, the same cashier would always be there to greet me. Michael. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a slow, practiced smile. He had been at that register for as long as I could remember. I didn't know much about him beyond the way he always gave a polite nod as he scanned my groceries: bread, eggs, vegetables, the same every time. We never talked beyond those small pleasantries, and I preferred it that way. Until that morning. I was exhausted. A long, draining week had left me barely functioning as I dragged myself through the aisles, grabbing my usual items on autopilot. When I reached the register, Michael was there, like always. But something was wrong. He was fidgeting, fingers tapping restlessly against the register buttons, his usual serene presence replaced by something jittery, almost nervous. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time in all these months, he spoke. "Well, if it isn't my favorite," he said, his voice strangely warm. "How's it going, kiddo?" I stopped, my hand still gripping the cart handle. Kiddo. That word slid under my skin, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. "You usually just say hello," I murmured, trying to keep my tone light. Michael blinked, his expression flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Sorry," he muttered, shaking his head like he was trying to clear fog from his mind. "Guess I got mixed up. Meant to say you're looking good today." A chill crept up my spine. Something about his tone was off. Forced, like someone trying too hard to mimic natural conversation. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was tired. Maybe I was. But as he scanned my groceries, I noticed something else. His name tag. Michael. Just like always. And yet, the way he looked at me, it was different. There was something unsettling in his gaze, a familiarity that didn't belong. And then he spoke again. "So, Joe, how's Mom? You and her planning to get together soon?" My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't told anyone at this store anything about my life. My mother. My family. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at him. "What did you say?" Michael smiled, calm, pleasant, like he hadn't just crossed a line he shouldn't have even known existed. "You told me about her last week, remember?" He chuckled, scanning the last of my items. "How's she doing?" I shook my head slowly. "No. I never told you anything about my mother." He laughed, but it was an empty sound. "Sure you did," he said easily, like I was the one who had forgotten. "But hey, don't worry, I won't tell her about your plans. She'll be fine." My stomach turned. My mother had been sick a few months ago. But no one outside of my family knew. I hadn't told a soul. I grabbed my receipt with trembling fingers and rushed out of the store, the door slamming shut behind me. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't clear the growing sense of unease curling in my chest. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else. Maybe. But deep down, I knew none of those things were true. That night, I called my mother. "Hey, Mom, have you been to the store lately?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Of course," she said. "I go every week." "Why? Did you talk to anyone?" "The cashier, maybe." "Michael?" A long silence. "Michael?" she repeated, her voice uncertain. I don't think so." "Why do you ask?" The cold knot in my stomach twisted tighter. She didn't know him. She had never spoken to him. And yet, somehow, he had known about her. The next day, I went back. The store was busy, customers moving in lazy, sluggish lines, the same overhead music playing on repeat. I walked straight to the register, my pulse hammering. But Michael wasn't there. The register was empty. I waited. Asked around. And that was when the unease turned to something darker, something suffocating. No one knew who I was talking about. The other employees, the ones who had been working there just as long, exchanged puzzled glances. They had no idea who Michael was. According to them, there had never been a cashier by that name. I left the store that day with no groceries. No answers. Just the lingering, skin-crawling certainty that someone, somewhere, was watching me. And that they knew far more than they should. Story 2. The fluorescent lights of the airport buzzed overhead, casting an artificial glow on the sea of weary travelers. I had just stepped off the plane, my mind sluggish from the long flight, my body weighed down by exhaustion. The terminal was alive with movement, families reuniting, businesspeople rushing past, announcements crackling over the intercom. But none of it seemed to touch me. I was trapped in that peculiar fog that settles in after hours of restless travel. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I weaved through the crowds, my only thought focused on getting home. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. A man, sitting near one of the departure gates, dressed in a dark jacket that looked slightly too heavy for the climate. He wasn't doing anything particularly strange, just sitting there, but something about him felt off. His eyes, dark and steady, were locked onto me. I swallowed hard, a small, inexplicable chill creeping up my spine. I had never seen this man before, and yet, his gaze carried a strange familiarity, as if he knew me. I quickened my pace, dismissing the unease as nothing more than post-flight paranoia. But just as I passed him, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Hey," he called, his tone eerily casual. "How's your dog doing?" I stopped so abruptly that my suitcase nearly toppled over. A cold dread slithered through me, tightening around my chest. I turned to face him, my mouth slightly open, searching for words. He was still watching me, his face unreadable. My voice caught in my throat. "I don't have a dog." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the kind of smile that wasn't meant to comfort, it was meant to unsettle. "Are you sure?" he said, his voice smooth and measured. "I could have sworn I saw you walking one the other day." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I shook my head. "You must have me confused with someone else." His eyes didn't waver, didn't blink. "Maybe," he murmured, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Or worse, he knew something I didn't. I took a step back, suddenly desperate to put distance between us. "I need to go." He gave a small nod, almost as if he had expected that answer. "All right. Take care." I turned and walked away, but the tension in my muscles didn't ease. Even as I navigated toward the baggage claim, my mind reeled. Who was that man? Why had he spoken to me? And how could he have known about a dog that didn't exist? By the time I reached the exit, I had almost convinced myself it was a bizarre coincidence, an innocent mistake. But as I approached my car in the dimly lit parking lot, my stomach twisted into knots. Something was off. Sitting on my passenger seat, neatly placed as though it had always been there, was a leash. A simple, worn leather leash. My breath hitched. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door handle. I hesitated, my pulse hammering so loudly it drowned out the sounds of the night. I didn't own a dog. I had never owned a dog. So why was there a leash in my car? I glanced around, scanning the empty lot. There was no one. No footsteps, no movement, just the eerie quiet that comes when the world feels too still. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. Swallowing the bile rising in my throat, I snatched the leash and tossed it into the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as I sped out of the lot, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror over and over. But there was nothing. No one. By the time I reached my apartment, my exhaustion had given way to sheer paranoia. I double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, and sat on the couch, staring at the leash now resting on my coffee table. Where had it come from? Had someone put it in my car? Had they been inside my car? How long had they been watching me? As the minutes stretched into an uneasy silence, the questions turned into something heavier, something that sat deep in my bones. This wasn't over. I wasn't alone. Somewhere, out there in the dark, something was waiting for me to put the pieces together. And I had the sinking feeling that, once I did, I would wish I never had. Story 3. I overslept that morning. The alarm I had set for myself hours earlier had barely cut through the fog of my dreams. My limbs felt leaden, my mind still tangled in the haze of sleep as I forced myself upright. The room was quiet, the air thick with that unsettling silence that lingers in the early hours. Then, a soft hum broke through the stillness, my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen glowed in the dim light, displaying a missed call from an unknown number. I frowned, my groggy mind debating whether to check it. Before I could decide, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. Don't forget to brush your teeth. I hesitated. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. It was odd, sure, but not alarming. Probably spam, I reasoned, some weird marketing ploy. With a dismissive shake of my head, I set the phone down and shuffled toward the bathroom. The mundane familiarity of my morning routine should have been comforting. The quiet splash of water from the faucet, the rhythmic strokes of my toothbrush against my teeth, normal, simple acts. But then I heard it. A sound. Faint, distant. A whisper. No, a voice. I turned toward the nightstand, where my phone rested, screen dim but still on. The voice was coming from the speaker. My breath hitched as I stepped closer, reaching out with a hesitant hand. The moment I swiped the screen, my stomach dropped. A recording was playing. It was my own voice. You're waking up. It's 7:30 a.m. You're turning off the alarm. You're getting out of bed now. The voice continued, narrating every action I had taken that morning with unsettling precision. The rustling of my blankets. The way I had rubbed my eyes before standing. Even the moment I hesitated before checking my phone. My breath came shallow and fast. This wasn't possible. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the phone, trying to stop the playback. The screen resisted my touch, as if refusing to obey me. The voice droned on. You're brushing your teeth now. You're standing in front of the mirror. You're looking at yourself, noticing the way your hair is messed up. I dropped the phone as though it had burned me. A sickening wave of dread churned in my stomach. I hadn't recorded this. I hadn't spoken a single word since waking up. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing down on me. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, a glitch, a prank, a hacked app. But nothing made sense. No app on my phone recorded my movements, let alone narrated them back to me. I forced myself to take slow, deliberate breaths, trying to push the fear away. Maybe it was just a coincidence, an elaborate software bug. I could reset my phone, delete suspicious apps, change my passwords. But then, later that afternoon, another message came. You'll start your work now. You'll open your laptop. You'll check your emails. You're going to be fine. My heart nearly stopped. Because at that exact moment, I had just sat down at my desk, my fingers hovering over the laptop trackpad, about to check my emails. A cold, creeping sensation crawled up my spine. This wasn't random. Someone was watching me. Tracking me. Predicting me. I spent hours combing through my phone, searching for any signs of malware or hidden surveillance apps. Nothing. No voice memos, no suspicious activity logs. Just the messages, the eerie, impossible messages that knew exactly what I was doing before I even did it. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice playing back my day, detailing every step, every glance, every breath. My mind spiraled. Was I losing my grip on reality? By midnight, my exhaustion was bone deep, but fear kept me awake. And then, as if sensing my restlessness, another message arrived. You know why I'm doing this. You can't hide from me. I see everything. I nearly dropped my phone. My pulse roared in my ears, my hands damp with sweat. No. No, no, no. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a glitch. Before I could react, the recording started again. But this time, it wasn't my voice. The sound was deeper now, rough and guttural, an inhuman rasp that made my skin crawl. I couldn't understand the words, if they even were words, but they carried a weight, a presence that filled the room like a suffocating fog. I stumbled back, my legs weak beneath me. The walls seemed closer, the air too thick. I needed to get out. Now. Then, I saw it. The front door. I had locked it before bed. I was certain. Yet now, it stood slightly ajar, a gaping black void leading into the night. My breath caught in my throat. No footsteps. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Just the door. Open. Waiting. I stepped closer, my body trembling. My phone, still clutched in my damp fingers, vibrated once more. Another message. You were always meant to see this. It's only a matter of time. I turned off the phone. But the words were already seared into my mind. This wasn't over. Whoever, whatever, was watching me, they weren't done yet. Story 4. It was an ordinary day, or at least it was supposed to be. I sat at my desk, sifting through endless stacks of paperwork, the rhythmic tapping of fingers on keyboards filling the otherwise silent office. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a dull glow over the room. Everything felt mundane, routine, until my coworker approached. She strolled over with a bright smile, holding her phone in her hand, her fingers tapping at the screen as she prepared to show me something. Hey, look at this, she said, her tone light and casual, oblivious to the storm she was about to unleash inside me. She turned the screen toward me, and my breath hitched in my throat. My eyes locked onto the image displayed on the phone, and an inexplicable chill slithered down my spine. There, on the screen, was a photo of me. It wasn't just a picture of me, no, it was something far more unsettling. I was captured in a moment, standing amidst a crowded event, a sea of strangers surrounding me. The setting appeared to be a grand conference hall, well lit, with people engaged in conversation, dressed in polished business attire. But I hadn't been there. My stomach twisted. The clothes I was wearing in the picture, the same ones I had on that very morning. The expression on my face, slightly awkward, as I always looked in photos, attempting to appear composed. Yet, I had not attended any events recently. In fact, I had spent the entirety of last weekend at home, unable to make it to a gathering I had planned to attend due to personal reasons. I could feel the color drain from my face as I stared at the image. Where was this taken? I asked, my voice unsteady. My throat was dry, my pulse thrumming erratically in my ears. My coworker blinked at me, her expression a mixture of amusement and confusion. At that conference last week, she replied, her tone casual, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. You don't remember being there? A heavy silence settled between us. I struggled to process her words. I had not been invited to that conference. I hadn't even known where it was held. And yet, there I was, frozen in time, captured in an event I had never attended. My head swam. I didn't go, I murmured, barely able to form the words. I wasn't there. She raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? I swear I saw you there. I mean, there's the proof, right? She gestured toward the phone again, still not grasping the gravity of what she had shown me. Maybe someone took it while you were talking to them. You really don't remember? My vision blurred as my mind raced. How could I forget something like this? The picture was too real, too vivid. It wasn't a case of mistaken identity, this wasn't just someone who looked like me. It was me. And yet, I knew with absolute certainty that I had never been in that place. A sickening sense of wrongness settled deep in my gut. My hands felt clammy as I forced myself to look away from the screen. It was as if acknowledging the picture somehow solidified its existence, made it undeniable. But I couldn't accept it. I shook my head. I didn't go, I repeated, my voice weak. She gave me a puzzled glance, then shrugged and walked away, as if my reaction was nothing more than forgetfulness, as if my horror was misplaced. But I knew better. I sat at my desk, my work forgotten, my thoughts spiraling into chaos. How could someone have a picture of me at an event I had never attended? Who took it? And why did it exist? The more I tried to rationalize it, the less sense it made. Maybe, just maybe, there had been some kind of mistake, someone who resembled me more than I thought possible. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the answer. The image haunted me, replaying in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. That night, I lay in bed, my phone in hand, staring at the picture, willing it to change, to morph into something else, to reveal its secret. But it remained the same. Unchanged. Real. Days passed, but the feeling of unease refused to leave me. I found myself withdrawing from my coworker, avoiding her gaze, dreading any mention of the photo. I became consumed by a gnawing fear. What if there were other moments, other memories I didn't remember? What if I had been to other places, done other things, and simply had no recollection of them? I had to know the truth. I reached out to a few people who had attended the conference, desperate for some clarity. One by one, they all confirmed what I already knew deep inside. I hadn't been there. Not a single one of them remembered seeing me. No one could explain why the picture existed. It was as if I had never been there at all. And then, just as inexplicably as it had appeared, the photo was gone. It vanished from my coworker's phone. It was nowhere to be found. Yet the memory of it clung to me, a lingering shadow I could never escape. Something had changed, something irreversible. And I was left with one terrifying thought. If a moment can exist without me remembering it, what else had I forgotten? Story 5. I had been looking forward to the weekend for what felt like forever. It wasn't often that I had the chance to escape from my routine, to step away from the monotony of work and responsibility. But this time, I had carved out the opportunity, a quick trip to visit some friends in a nearby city. I packed my bags the night before, double-checked that everything in my apartment was in order, and left early the next morning, excited for a much-needed break. The weekend was exactly what I needed. Great food, better company, and for once, a sense of peace that came with being away from home. I barely checked my phone, only replying to a few messages from family, enjoying the feeling of being untethered. When Sunday evening rolled around, I made the drive back home, feeling refreshed yet exhausted from the journey. I was ready to fall into bed and ease back into my routine. But as I pulled into my usual parking spot, something felt off. At first, I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was just the quiet unease that sometimes came with returning home after time away. But as I stepped out of my car, I noticed my neighbor standing by the entrance to our building. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had been waiting for me. "Hey. How was your trip?" she asked. Her voice was friendly enough, but there was something in her tone, something just a little too forced. It was great, I said, unlocking my trunk to grab my bag. Really needed the break. How about you? Everything good around here? She hesitated. A pause just long enough to send a shiver of uncertainty through me. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you something, she said, shifting slightly. I know you weren't around last night, but I heard loud music coming from your apartment. I stopped. Loud music? I repeated, trying to make sense of her words. That's not possible. I wasn't home. Yeah, I figured, she said, rubbing her arm. But I swear, it was coming from your place. It was so loud I could hear it through the walls. I thought maybe you had people over. A slow, creeping unease spread through me. No, I said firmly. I've been gone since Friday morning. No one's been in my apartment. She blinked, looking uncertain for a moment before giving a small, awkward shrug. Ha. Must have been a mistake then. Sorry, I just thought you should know. I forced a polite smile, exchanged a few more pleasantries, and headed inside, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. How could music have been blasting from my apartment when I wasn't even there? I stepped into my unit, my senses immediately on high alert. Everything was as I had left it. The air was still, the silence pressing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. I walked through each room, checking for anything out of place. The doors were locked. My speakers were off. My spare key was still hidden where I had left it. So who, or what, had been in my apartment? The next morning, I tried to push the unease aside. Maybe my neighbor had simply misheard. The walls were thin. Sound carried. It could have been someone else. But that afternoon, as I sat scrolling through my phone, I heard it. Music. Soft at first, almost like a whisper. A distant, unfamiliar melody drifting through the air. My breath hitched as I turned my head toward the sound. It was coming from inside my apartment. My stomach twisted. Slowly, I rose from my chair, my pulse hammering in my ears. The music was getting clearer now, louder. It wasn't anything I recognized, certainly not something I would ever play. The tune was slow, eerie, almost wrong. I rushed to my front door, fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The music stopped. Everything was exactly as I had left it. No sign of movement. No sign that anyone had been here. I stood frozen in the doorway, the silence pressing against me like a weight. I wasn't losing my mind. I had heard it. My neighbor had heard it too. But there was no explanation. No one should have been here. And yet, something was. That night, I received a message from my neighbor. Did you figure out where the music was coming from? It was playing again last night. Super weird. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. I hadn't been home the first time it happened. And now, someone else had heard it again. But the more I thought about it, the more questions began to claw at the edges of my mind. Why had it only happened when I was gone? Why hadn't I heard it the first night? Who, or what, had been playing the music in my absence? I tried to tell myself it was nothing. That it was just a strange coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. That somehow, even in the quiet, the music hadn't truly stopped. And every time I glanced at my phone, every time the air felt just a little too still, I wondered. Was someone, somewhere, still listening? Story 6. I had just returned from running errands, my arms weighed down by grocery bags, when I noticed something unusual on my doorstep. A small envelope, thick and cream-colored, sat there like it had been placed with deliberate care. It wasn't the usual kind of mail I received, no return address, no postage marks. Just an unassuming envelope, yet something about it sent a shiver down my spine. Curiosity and unease warred within me as I picked it up. The texture of the paper was smooth, expensive, the kind used for special occasions. I frowned, flipping it over in my hands. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, elegant but firm, written in deep black ink. No indication of who it was from. No clue as to why it was here. With growing apprehension, I slid my finger under the flap and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled within the envelope's confines, was a thank you card. The front of it bore a simple floral design, accented with gold lettering, nothing too extravagant, just tasteful and understated. I hesitated, then opened the card, my breath hitching as my eyes scanned the neatly written message inside. Thank you for everything. Your kindness means more than you know. Best wishes. A pleasant enough sentiment, yet my stomach twisted into knots. Below the message was a signature, but it wasn't a name I recognized. Just a few neatly written letters that held no meaning to me. No explanation. No context. Just a nameless, faceless gratitude directed at me. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I had never received a thank you card like this before, and I had no idea who had sent it or what it was in reference to. The handwriting, it nagged at me, like something just on the edge of memory, familiar yet distant, like a whisper in a dream. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't place it. A mistake, maybe. A card meant for someone else, dropped here by accident. But as I examined the envelope again, doubt gnawed at me. My name. My address. Whoever sent this knew exactly where it was going. A chill crept along my spine as a strange sensation settled over me, a feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lingering too long. I turned, scanning my quiet street, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. No lurking figures, no unknown cars. Just the rustling trees and the occasional chirp of birds. And yet, I couldn't shake the eerie weight of being observed. I went inside, locking the door behind me, my fingers lingering on the deadbolt longer than necessary. The card sat on my kitchen table, its presence impossible to ignore. I reached for my phone, dialing a few close friends, hoping one of them might confess to sending it. But none did. My family didn't recognize the handwriting either. I even asked my neighbors if they had seen anyone around my house, but they only responded with puzzled looks and head shakes. No one knew anything. And that made it worse. The more I tried to uncover the card's origins, the more isolated I felt. As though the sender wasn't just anonymous but deliberately hidden, like a shadow slipping through my life unnoticed. At night, the feeling of unease grew unbearable. Every creak of my house, every rustling leaf outside sent my heart pounding. Was someone out there? Watching? Waiting? I started double-checking my locks, leaving lights on in rooms I wasn't using, peering out my windows in the dead of night. But there was never anything there. The paranoia was suffocating. I tried to rationalize it, maybe I had done something kind for a stranger, an anonymous act of goodwill that had prompted this mysterious gratitude. But I couldn't think of anything. And why remain anonymous? Why not simply write a name, a small clue, anything? Instead, it was like they wanted me to know I had been noticed, but not by whom. Desperate for answers, I examined the card again. The stationery company was a small local business. I visited one of their stores, scanning their selection, hoping for a clue. But the design was common, something anyone could purchase. When I asked the clerk if the handwriting looked familiar, they only shook their head. The realization was slow but suffocating, there were no answers to be found. Days passed, and still, the card sat on my table. It became an unshakable presence in my life, a silent reminder that someone, somewhere, had reached out to me with unknown intent. The message was kind, but it didn't feel like kindness. It felt like a whisper in the dark, a presence just beyond my reach. Finally, Unable to stand it any longer, I threw it away. But it didn't help. The feeling lingered, stretching out into the silence of my home. Even without the card, I felt watched, as though something had shifted, something unseen but deeply present. I started noticing small things, the way my porch light flickered at odd hours, the sensation of movement in my peripheral vision, the nagging thought that certain objects weren't exactly where I had left them. And then there were the nights, when I'd wake abruptly with the overwhelming certainty that someone had been standing just outside my window. I told myself it was nothing. Just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. The card hadn't been a thank you. It had been a warning. And whoever sent it, they were still watching. Story 7. The day had stretched on longer than I'd liked, the steady hum of my office offering little comfort after back-to-back meetings. Fatigue pressed against me, but I was determined to power through the last few hours before heading home. As I took a slow sip of coffee, I absently reached for my phone, scanning for missed messages. That's when I saw it. A text from my friend. "Why are you walking past my house right now?" The words sent an odd chill down my spine. My fingers hovered over the screen as confusion washed over me. I glanced at the time, 3:15 p.m. I had been at my desk the entire day, barely moving except for a short trip to the break room. There was no way I had been walking past anyone's house, let alone my friend's. My thoughts scrambled for an explanation. Maybe they were joking. Maybe they had seen someone who looked like me. Maybe it was just some weird mistake. But something about the way they phrased it, the absolute certainty in their words, unsettled me. I quickly typed back. "What do you mean? I'm at work." The reply came almost instantly. "I saw you outside. You were walking really slowly past my house. What's going on?" A slow, creeping unease settled over me. My hands froze over the screen as I reread the message. Walking slowly past their house. I hadn't moved from my chair all day. There was no chance I had been anywhere near their neighborhood. My stomach twisted. I'm literally at my desk. Are you sure it was me? A few agonizing seconds passed. Then, another message. Yeah. I'm sure. You looked right at me. You were wearing the same clothes as you are now. My breath caught in my throat. The clothes I had on weren't generic. A plain blue shirt and black jeans, nothing flashy, but distinct enough that it wouldn't be an easy mistake. Could my friend have really seen someone else? Someone who just happened to look exactly like me? And if so, why had they stopped and stared at my friend? The air in the office suddenly felt heavier. The distant clacking of keyboards, the soft murmur of co-workers, it all faded into the background. I grabbed my phone and called them, my heart hammering as the dial tone stretched out. Then, click. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Are you sure you're not messing with me?" My friend's voice came through, tight with uncertainty. "I'm not messing with you. I saw you walk past my house. You looked at me. But then, you just kept walking." I swallowed hard. That wasn't me. A heavy silence settled between us. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then, finally. Then who was it? A sickening wave of dread twisted through my gut. I had no answer. No rational explanation. My mind raced, grasping at possibilities. Could someone be pretending to be me? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But how? How would someone know exactly what I was wearing? How would they know to walk past my friend's house at that precise moment? The more I thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Then, another text. "I'm looking out the window right now. I don't see you anymore. But I swear, you were standing there for a second. Just standing. Staring at the house before you walked off. This is freaking me out. A shiver crawled down my spine. I turned my head slowly toward the window beside my desk, half expecting to see someone, standing outside, staring back. But the street below was empty. The usual movement of the city carried on, oblivious. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong. I forced myself to respond. I don't know what's going on, but it wasn't me. Maybe it was someone who just looked like me. Even as I typed the words, I didn't believe them. That night, as I made my way home, my route took me past my friend's house. The street was quiet, the houses dark, the night air thick with an eerie stillness. I stopped for a moment, staring at the spot where my friend had seen me earlier. The shadows seemed deeper here, the streetlights casting long, distorted silhouettes against the pavement. Had I been here before? Or had something else? A prickle of unease crept up my spine. I turned away, walking briskly the rest of the way home. But the feeling of being watched clung to me, an unseen presence lingering just out of sight. And deep down, I knew. Whatever had happened today, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. Story 8. The day had stretched long, filled with the usual mundane errands that made up my weekends. By the time I turned into my driveway, the sky was ablaze with hues of orange and purple, the last remnants of daylight bleeding away. I sighed, grateful to finally be home. Parking my car, I reached for my belongings when something caught my attention, a small detail so insignificant at first, yet enough to send a shiver down my spine. The glove compartment was slightly ajar. I knew I hadn't left it open. Curious, I leaned forward and pulled it open completely. My breath hitched as my gaze landed on an unfamiliar sight, a small key, resting atop a neatly folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. The weight of it was familiar, the ridges and grooves unmistakable. It was a duplicate of my house key. But that was impossible. I hadn't made any copies recently, nor had I given one to anyone else. My fingers tightened around it as my mind raced, sifting through memories, searching for an explanation. Had I absent-mindedly placed it there myself? Had someone else been inside my car? I swallowed hard, shoving the unease aside. Telling myself I was overthinking things, I closed the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. Yet the key remained clenched in my hand, its cold touch burning into my palm as I entered my house. That night, sleep evaded me. Every creak of the house felt sinister, every shadow stretched just a little too long. My thoughts spiraled, returning to that key over and over. Who had put it there? And why? The next morning, the unease hadn't faded. I retrieved the key from my nightstand, turning it over in my fingers, searching for anything, any tiny scratch or imperfection, that might distinguish it from my own. But there was nothing. It was perfect. Identical. My stomach twisted. I decided to ask my neighbors if they had seen anything unusual. Their responses were the same, nothing out of the ordinary, no strangers lurking around. The sense of paranoia grew stronger, sinking its claws deeper into my mind. That night, I checked my locks twice. No, 3 times. I even lifted the rug by my front door to confirm that my original spare key was still there. It was. Yet I kept the mysterious duplicate in my pocket, as if letting it out of my sight might invite something far worse. The following days were a blur of anxiety. The feeling of being watched was constant. It followed me at work, in the grocery store, even as I sat in traffic. My every movement felt observed, scrutinized by an unseen presence just beyond my line of sight. Then, on a particularly cold evening, I saw it. A flicker of movement on my front porch. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. At first, I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my nerves getting the better of me. But as I turned to unlock my door, my gaze dropped to the ground, and my blood ran cold. The key. The duplicate. Sitting neatly on my porch, as if placed there deliberately. I staggered back, the world tilting as my thoughts raced. How? I had kept it with me, hadn't I? My pockets were empty now. When had I lost it? And worse, who had put it here? A cold dread settled in my bones. This was no accident. Someone had been inside my car. Someone had been near my home. Someone had access to my space, my life. I snatched up the key, my hands trembling. The walls of my home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a fragile illusion of security. From that moment on, I changed everything. I took different routes home. I checked my surroundings religiously. I inspected my car every time before stepping inside. But no matter what I did, that feeling never left me. I never discovered who had placed the key in my glove compartment. I never learned why it had appeared on my porch. But even now, I can feel it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. Always just a step behind me. Story 9. The night was heavy with exhaustion, the kind that clung to my bones and made every movement feel sluggish. Another late shift at work had drained me completely, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed for a few stolen hours of sleep before dragging myself through yet another grueling day. I barely remember kicking off my shoes before sinking onto my mattress, phone in hand, scrolling absently through messages and emails. A mechanical habit, something to wind down my mind before surrendering to sleep. I almost missed it, the tiny red dot on my calendar app, signaling a new event. That was when everything changed. I clicked the notification, expecting some overlooked reminder or a glitch. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. There, in bold, unassuming letters, was an event scheduled for midnight. You'll be late. A chill spread through my body, slow and insidious. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I hadn't scheduled anything, certainly not for midnight. I checked the details. No description. No location. No guests. Just the time and that unsettling message. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd been hacked. Maybe my phone was acting up. That was logical. That was safe. Yet, the longer I stared at the screen, the harder it became to shake the creeping sense of unease pressing against me. My heart thudded against my ribs as my mind whispered a single question. Who had put this here? The clock read 11:30 p.m. I told myself it was nothing, just an anomaly, but my fingers trembled as I tried to delete the event. It wouldn't let me. The option to remove it simply wasn't there. That was the first moment I truly felt it. The wrongness. I locked my phone, tossed it aside, and tried to shake the feeling. It's just a glitch. But the unease stuck to me like a second skin. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I sat there, staring at the darkness of my room, every shadow seeming just a little too deep, too still. And then, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzed. I jumped. The screen lit up. A new notification. Reminder, you'll be late. My breath hitched. The room felt colder, the air dense and suffocating. This wasn't random. I hesitated for a moment before my curiosity won. Slowly, I reached for my phone and tapped the notification. The calendar app opened, displaying the same midnight event. But something had changed. The words. They weren't the same anymore. You're late. I blinked. My vision swam for a moment, my mind grasping for logic. Had I misread it before? No. No, I was sure. I was sure. My hands were slick with sweat as I tried to close the app, but my phone was unresponsive. I pressed the home button. Nothing. The power button. Nothing. It was as if the screen was holding me there, forcing me to look. The clock on my phone flicked over to 12:05 a.m. And the text changed again. You're too late. I nearly dropped the phone. A cold, prickling sensation crept up my spine. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't some prank. This felt deliberate. The room around me suddenly felt wrong. The shadows too thick. The air too heavy. I turned my head slowly, an overwhelming sense of being watched taking hold. Nothing. But I wasn't convinced. I forced my fingers to move, to power off my phone. The screen went dark. Relief washed over me in a fleeting wave, until I heard it. A faint vibration. Even though the screen was black, the phone buzzed again. I lifted it with trembling fingers. The screen was still off, but I knew. I knew the event was still there, waiting for me. For the next few nights, it didn't stop. Every night, at midnight, the event returned with a new message. You should have been there. It's too late now. Each time, the words felt more personal, more intimate, like something was whispering directly into my ear. Like it knew me. I tried everything to remove it. Deleting the event, factory resetting my phone, even switching to a new device. It didn't matter. It always came back. And then, one night, the message changed again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. It's time. My stomach twisted into knots as I tapped the notification with shaking hands. The calendar opened. The event was still there. But now, the screen was blank. No title. No time. No words. Just empty space. And then, as I stared at the screen, something knocked at my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. I live alone. The phone slipped from my fingers, landing on the mattress with a soft thud. The knock came again. And then a third time, louder. I didn't move. Couldn't breathe. The silence stretched. Then, the doorknob twisted. The lock clicked. And the door began to slowly, agonizingly, creak open. Story 10. I came home late one evening, bone-tired from another grueling day at work. My only thought was to collapse onto the couch and let the quiet of the night lull me into much-needed rest. The neighborhood lay in silence as I pulled into my driveway, the streetlights flickering and casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. The only sound was the whisper of the wind, rustling through the trees like hushed voices in the dark. It felt like any other night, until I reached my front door. Something was off. I noticed it immediately. The mailbox was slightly ajar. At first, I brushed it off. It wasn't unusual, sometimes the wind did that, or the mailman had been careless. But as I stepped closer, I saw it. A single slip of paper, peeking out just enough to catch my eye. Curiosity tugged at me. I reached in and pulled it out, expecting a bill, a flyer, maybe even a misplaced letter. Instead, I found myself holding a plain white sheet of paper, unmarked except for a short message scrawled in bold black ink. I'll be back tomorrow. I froze. The note was simple, too simple. No signature. No explanation. Just that ominous statement, stark against the emptiness of the page. I turned it over, searching for anything more, but the back was blank. My heart pounded harder as the weight of the note settled in my hands, heavier than paper should ever feel. I swallowed, my gaze flickering around the yard. The street remained still. The houses stood silent. But something had shifted. The air felt different, thicker, colder. The kind of cold that doesn't come from the wind, but from something unseen. I forced myself to move, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, securing the deadbolt behind me. I placed the note on the kitchen counter and stared at it as if it might reveal more if I looked long enough. Who would leave something like this? And why? I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank. A mistake. The wrong address. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Personal. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind, made my skin prickle. I kept imagining footsteps just outside my window, a shadow lingering in the dark. More than once, I swore I heard the faintest whisper of breath beyond my bedroom door. But when I gathered the courage to check, there was nothing. Nothing but the silence pressing in from all sides. Morning came sluggishly, dragging me from my fitful sleep. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I was being ridiculous. Still, as soon as I stepped outside, my stomach knotted. I made my way to the mailbox, my breath shallow. Empty. No new mail. No note. No trace of what had unsettled me the night before. Had I dreamt it? I wanted to believe I had. I wanted to convince myself I'd just been exhausted, my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. I had held the note in my hands. I had felt the way it sent a chill down my spine, the way it lingered in the air long after I set it down. The day crawled by. I tried to keep busy, work, errands, anything to distract myself, but the words gnawed at me. I'll be back tomorrow. Who was coming back? What did they want? That night, I couldn't ignore the unease curling in my gut. I double-checked every lock, drew every curtain. Still, it felt like someone, something, was watching. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds between each creak of the house. Sleep never came. The next morning, I forced myself outside. I needed air. Needed to clear my head. I walked through the neighborhood, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. Then I saw it. A sign, taped to a telephone pole at the corner of the street. I couldn't make out the words at first. But as I got closer, my breath hitched. It was the same handwriting. The same black ink. I'm back. The world tilted. My chest tightened. I whipped my head around, scanning the empty street, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. The houses stood quiet, indifferent. The trees swayed lazily, betraying no sign of movement. But I knew better. Someone was out there. Someone had been waiting. I hurried home, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. My skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes pressing in from the darkness. I checked the mailbox again, empty. But that didn't matter. They had found another way to reach me. Evening fell, and I found myself standing at the window, staring out at the street, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The streetlights flickered on, painting long shadows against the pavement. The wind howled softly. But the night remained still. And then... knock. Soft at first. Almost hesitant. I barely breathed. Knock. Louder this time. More insistent. My chest tightened as I turned toward the door, dread creeping up my spine like a cold, skeletal hand. I knew who it was. And I knew, this time, they weren't just leaving a note.